The debate over climate change has reached a fever pitch in recent years as we face record-setting heat and rising sea levels. And in what could be seen as a sober warning of what's to come, a new documentary called The Underwater Forest gives us a closer look at what happens when oceans overtake land.
Here, just off the coast of Alabama, lies an ancient forest of giant trees. Covered in dense carpets of sea anemones and swarming with schools of fish, this strange underwater world is unlike anything ever seen before.
Ben Raines is a senior reporter for Alabama.com. He wrote and directed this film, and he joins me now from Mobile. Ben, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Ben, you followed the team that studied this ancient forest off the coast of Alabama. Just how old is it?
Well, the forest we've dated now to about 60,000 years ago. So this is actually an ice age before the one everybody thinks about. You know, when we talk about ice ages, everybody thinks of cavemen and mastodons and all. That ice age was about 12,000 years ago. This was an earlier ice age, 60,000 years ago. And it turns out the planet has these ice ages every 40 to 100,000 years.
I have to say, this is just so remarkable to imagine that these are 60,000-year-old trees that are still rooted, as you point out, in the earth there. How was this forest found?
So after Hurricane Ivan, a fisherman was traveling, he was going fishing out in the Gulf, and we all have depth finders on our boat that are, sonar machines that show you what the bottom looks like. And he was running along and saw a bunch of fish. So he started fishing there, but there was very little relief on the bottom. Normally if there's a wreck or something, you see a shape that looms up 5-10 feet off the bottom, and this was, lower than a foot. So he went to a dive shop and asked the owner of the dive shop if he'd go out there and take a look at the number, the GPS coordinates. That fellow's name's Chaz Broughton. He went out there, swam down to the bottom, and there were trees everywhere. And that's how it was found.
Just extraordinary. What did you think when you first went down there?
Well, so this same guy taught me how to dive, and knowing I was a newspaper reporter that covered the environment, he taunted me for years saying, well, I got to take you to the underwater forest. I couldn't believe it when I first got out there. You hit the bottom, and it's this weird sort of twilight world. You're at the bottom of the ocean, but there are all these trees around you, and there are limbs and logs laying on the bottom. But instead of squirrels and things, there are crabs crawling all around. It's like a sort of a fairy world kind of experience. Just really, really magical place.
So I feel really lucky. I have my open water certification. I know what it's like to dive. I can only imagine what that must have been like for you to see that. This is not that deep down, though. It's about 60 feet, which some might say, oh, that sounds really deep. But when you consider that, some folks, when they go diving, they go well over 100 feet deep. What can we learn, Ben, from a discovery like this?
Well, this is, here on the Gulf Coast, we don't have climate records like you have in cold places where things are frozen in ice, so they can drill out cores and they can learn about the atmosphere 2,000 years ago or whatever. Down here, things are made of sand and mud. They're not permanent like that. So to find this sort of time capsule is really for the scientists. I mean, it's a gold mine, and they've already been able to figure out what the weather was like, the temperatures. The really neat thing about this forest, it's a cypress forest like we have on the Gulf Coast today in the swamps. If you've seen the Okefenokee swamp or any of the big swamps like that with cypress trees out in the water, that's what this was. But they took cores of the sediment, and they were able to look at the pollen in the sediment, and they discovered how it was different from a modern Gulf Coast forest. Down here today, the trees are mainly cypress and tupelo. This forest it was dominated by cypress and then alder trees and oak trees. Well, today, to look for a forest like that, you have to go to the coast of North Carolina, Virginia, or Maryland, much colder places. So this forest, even though it was here on the Gulf Coast, was a forest built for a much colder climate, which is really neat. And what it tells you is during the Ice Age, when most of America was under these ice sheets a mile thick, this place was colder. It was like Virginia. So, there's just this amazing transition in both temperature and rainfall events. The trees struggled back then because it was a colder environment. They grew very little year to year. So they've been able to learn all sorts of fascinating things about what the world was like back then.
And Ben, tell us about what's happening at this site now. What is it that scientists are looking for? And also, I know you're obviously very careful to keep the exact location of this secret, given that it is so incredibly rare.
Yeah, well, so the way all this got started, I wrote the first news stories about it after I got the dive shop guy to take me out there. And we put some video up, and it went viral on the internet. People were just fascinated, all over the world. Among the fascinated people were salvage companies who called me and actually offered me quite a lot of money to give them the coordinates to the site because they wanted to go mine the logs from the seafloor. They wanted to pull them up and make things out of them. And one of the things you have to understand about the wood out there is it's perfect. It has been, in the marine environment, when things are sealed away from oxygen, they don't decompose because the bacteria that would cause rot and things like that need oxygen. So sealed under, these things were under about 9 feet of mud and sand, it turns out. But even once you get about 6 inches to a foot of sand over something, it's protected from oxygen. So, you bring one of these trees up, you cut it with a saw, it's as hard to cut as if you're cutting a tree down in your yard right now. And when the amazing thing, you smell the sap in the wood. Wow. It's still in there, and you get this piney, fresh scent when you cut the logs. And if you set a piece down, you can wait and watch the sap actually ooze out of it, 60,000-year-old sap. So to the salvage companies, this was, a gold mine. They could make coffee tables, electric guitars, anything you can think of, you can make out of wood. And imagine what a 60,000-year-old coffee table would sell for. So I understood their motivation and immediately set about trying to get it protected, which we're working toward now. We're trying to have it turned into a national marine sanctuary. So, people would still be able to fish there and everything, but you would not be allowed to pull any of the wood up and take it. That's our main goal. Well, and the scientists are working closely with us to do that.
It's an incredible story, an incredible discovery. Ben Raines, thanks so much for telling us all about it.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Everybody out there, you should go watch The Underwater Forest. You can find it on YouTube. It's really fascinating. I think you'll love it.